many years, before she jumped out of the plane, actually. And that was just last year. And Dr. George has done so many treatment programs, particularly with families and teens dealing with mental health conditions, including bipolar disorder, as well as co-author of the book on the
bipolar teen.
Exactly, that's it. I thought it'd be in the bulletin. She's done a lot of work in this field. She's local here. We're so glad that she is here. And as most of you heard that were here in the service, before the end of the service, she is an adventurer. She gets out there and kayaks from island to island in the San Juan Islands and jumps out planes with her 18-year-old son. And she has two children, 16 and 18. And she said, that's where some of my wisdom has come from, dealing with my own children. And so she brings her wisdom, her academic credentials, her work as a licensed social worker and psychologist. And we're so glad that Liz is here. Here we go.
Happy to be here, and thank you for coming out in the cold. Actually, I felt a little nostalgic this weekend because when my kids were little, on Saturdays, like yesterday, we would have a lemonade stand, and then on Sundays, we would sled. So this is my favorite kind of weekend in Colorado, so thank you for being here. So I'm going to be talking about using mindfulness with parenting. I think that that's going to be a more helpful way of helping you know your kids and then know how to be the most effective parents for your kids. Or I'm going to say parents. I see that some people here might be here as grandparents or just have an interest in other ways, but hopefully you don't mind. I'm just going to say parents. So the definition of mindfulness is really just paying attention to your experience from moment to moment. And instead of talking more about what mindfulness is, I'm going to have us do just a short exercise so that you can get the sense of it. If you feel comfortable, would you please stand up? And if you don't want to stand, that's okay. You can switch out feet for seat. So you can keep your eyes open or you can keep them closed. What I'd like for you to do is just feel the soles of your feet on the floor. And begin to notice the sensations. The sense of touch in the soles of your feet. And notice what you're feeling in your feet and in your body. Is there a settling or a tingling? Is there a flow? And sometimes it might be hard to feel anything for people. And to better feel the sensation in the soles of the feet, try gently rocking forward and backward on your feet, and then side to side. And try making little circles with your knees, feeling the changing sensations in the soles of your feet. And if your mind wanders, that's perfectly natural. Just bring your attention back to your feet. All right, and now you can come back to the room, and if you'd like, just turn to a neighbor and talk briefly about what you noticed. So now you know how to do mindfulness. It's really that simple. Sometimes people make it sound really complicated. It's not. So the attitude of mindfulness, and this comes from John Kabat-Zinn, who created a mindfulness-based stress reduction program that's used in hospitals and HMOs. he describes these as non-judging, which is non-appraising. So you're not weighing in with a positive or a negative. Patience for things to unfold in their own time. Beginner's mind is being receptive to new possibilities, being able to see things afresh, see things anew. Trusting in yourself. Non-striving is non-doing, non-grasping. Accepting things as they actually are in the present, and accepting yourself as you are. We can't change until we can fully accept ourselves as we are. And then letting go, instead of holding on, let our experience be what it is and practice observing it moment to moment, like you just did. So as you can see, this is a practice. No one is perfect at doing this. This is constantly coming back to it and rediscovering it. So why put the effort forth? This is a lot of effort, and I'm just giving you 2 tiny little blurbs about mindfulness. If you look into the research, there's so much research now about how it helps the brain and the body and health conditions, but it can help us stay calmer even when we're not upset and when we're upset, and then also it helps lots of medical conditions, depression, anxiety, chronic pain, to name a few. So I'm going to bring mindfulness into parenting now. This is a quote by Mila Kabat-Zinn. She's John Kabat-Zinn's wife, and she and he wrote a book called Everyday Blessings, which is one of the most amazing parenting books I've ever read, just about being mindful with yourself and with your children. And what I think might be helpful as you're reading this definition of mindfulness is to talk about why I'm going to focus on mindfulness as opposed to just talking about different child behavior problems and giving you strategies for those. I think it's much more helpful, because every child is different and every situation is different, to talk about a model of parenting. I am going to talk a little bit about some strategies, but for the most part I want you to think about you as a parent and how you're showing up. And I want to highlight this by introducing you to 2 different children. So child A is bright, was challenging things, quick humor, very early in life, driven, learned to ride his bicycle at 2 years old just by going down the driveway again and again until he found his balance. Loved pets and animals and people, and sang songs about loving. Industrious and curious, making art projects and cooking, and always having lemonade stands, like I mentioned, which I love. Athletic, excelled in sports, and then really took on football as his main sport and played every season, both sides of the ball, almost every position on the field. Worked hard in school and did well, had a long-term romantic relationship with his best friend, was a leader with his friends. This is the kid that his friends go to when he struggles. And now I want you to think about child B. This child struggled a lot with illnesses and was on his way to being diagnosed with reactive airway disease, had lots of treatment, and was eventually hospitalized as a toddler. He was in urgent care every year for the next 10 years, whether it be sickness or injury or what have you. Struggled with teachers who didn't get him or didn't understand him and didn't do well in those classes. Had aggression sometimes, and the parents got called about aggressive outbursts, and sometimes even as a first grader getting advice with 4th graders. It's kind of that energy. As a teen, pushed the limits, got into trouble, and actually liked kids who kind of pushed the limits, those sort of slick kids, and had a really difficult time with accountability over the lifespan, and could argue a lot and be really challenging. And so think about how you imagine these 2 children, and think about how you might parent them. And I'm wondering if it would surprise you to know that these are the same child. These are actually my younger son. You'll be hearing some about my children in this talk. So each child has strengths and challenges, and the only consistent strategy is to know yourself and to know your child to be able to be the most effective parent that you want to be. You probably could each come up with a list of these for your own child, is my guess. So I'm not going to educate you on each of the stages, but I do think it's important to know about the stages of development. The everyday parenting challenges we have are a result from a lack of integration within the brain. And the reason the brain is incapable of integration is because it hasn't had time to develop yet. Sometimes we are actually expecting our kids to do things that their brain just cannot do yet. I'm going to talk a bit about The Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel. And he goes through these different stages of development and gives different strategies and things you might see. There's also a wonderful series of books, Your 4-Year-Old, Your 5-Year-Old by Louise Bates Ames, PhD, that I think are a really good resource. The reason I do think that it's helpful is something that I realized with my own son when he went from 3 and 3.5. He'd always been really agreeable. This is my older son. He's less argumentative. In fact, my friend teased me that all he ever said was, uh-huh, and ote, mama. But between 3 and 3.5, he became pretty aggressive and pretty argumentative. And then I remembered reading that boys have a surge of testosterone between 3 and 3.5. And so I realized, oh, it's not my parenting, it's not that my child all of a sudden is a problem, this is just natural development. So I do think it's important for you to have education around that. So this is also from Whole Brain Child. So I am going to talk about one piece of the brain that is very helpful for you to understand in a way in which you can help the integration here. So when the brain is integrated, there's a healthy flow like a river, as you can see in the middle. And when it isn't, it can be on either bank of the river, more in chaos or more in rigidity. Chaos is like a temper tantrum or a meltdown. Rigidity is more, I'm not going to share my toys. No, I'm not going to do that. So you can kind of get the sense of that. The lack of integration is often related to the hemispheres of the brain. So as you can see, left hemisphere is more logical, literal, linear. All L's, by the way, this is a really helpful way to remember left brain, right brain. I struggle with this. Right brain is more nonverbal, gut feeling, heartfelt sense, emotional, and experiential. So think about the last time something challenging happened with your child. Just take a moment to think about that. Might have just happened. And then think, were they more in chaos? Or were they more in rigidity? Were they kind of freaking out, more emotional? Or were they more rigid and not budging, kind of stuck? Depending where they are, we're going to have a different strategy for integration. Because if they're on one side or the other of the river, we want to get them back in the middle. We want them to become integrated again. Because at any age, in order to live a balanced, meaningful, creative life full of connected relationships, the two hemispheres have to work together, as you might be able to see here. So here's a strategy called Connect and Redirect. This is just one. This book is full of strategies for working with both sides of the brain, and then also upstairs and downstairs brain, which are limbic system and prefrontal cortex. So I just really want to highlight that, but there's not time for me to go through more strategies. So this strategy is called Surf Emotional Waves, the Connect and the Redirect strategy. So what you're going to do first, and this is for when they're more in chaos. You would do something different if they were more in rigidity. But if they're more in chaos, what you want to do is you want to connect first with where they are. No matter how nonsensical and frustrating your child's feelings are, they're real and they're important to your child. And in fact, very young children are right brain dominant. The left brain hasn't even formed yet. And so you really have to connect with where they are. I remember when my kids were babies and toddlers, I would say, oh, it's so hard being a little guy. It's so hard. I know that's so challenging. So you really want to connect with them. And then you want to give those nonverbal signals, physical touch, if your child's okay with that. Some kids get overstimulated or overwhelmed by that. You don't want to, if your child's upset, you don't want to touch them unless they're okay with that. But if they are, just a comforting touch, empathic facial expressions, a nurturing tone, that engages the social engagement system and brings the brain into a more regulated state. Then you might have to take a break. It kind of depends on how quickly your child will calm or settle. If they settle quickly, already you can do step 2, redirecting with the left hemisphere. Talk about reasoning, a logical explanation for what happened, planning, problem solving and preventing. Sometimes your kid will start this conversation actually. But if it takes a while for your kid to settle down, you might need to take a break, and then you might need to come back to this, and then be able to do this. If your child is very young, they may not be able to do this at all. When kids start asking why all the time, you know then that the left hemisphere is coming online and that you can try this strategy. For some kids, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, I have worked with kids who have bipolar disorder and other kinds of more extreme dysregulated nervous systems, but for those kids, sometimes you do want to try to avoid those meltdowns if they really have a hard time and they can't settle. Ross Green wrote a book called The Explosive Child that is really helpful for these kids, and one of the strategies that he used that I've used with my own kids, because I think it's helpful no matter where your kid is the basket A, basket B, and basket C. So basket A is a safety item. If a kid is running through the house with scissors and you know taking the scissors away is going to cause a meltdown, you still do it because you need to keep them safe. Basket B is something where you're negotiating with your child. And this is where you have a little bit of room. If you see your child getting upset and really starting to lose it, you can pull back from the negotiation to try to prevent one of those meltdowns and then come back to it again and again, maybe until you're able to resolve it. And the basket C items are things that you just don't mention. I did this with clothing with my kids from the get-go, and every year I got a note home from the teachers. They don't have a coat, they don't have gloves, they don't have a hat, and I told them, do you want to come to my house in the morning and fight that battle? Because I'm not, and even if I sent them in, they would just lose them anyway. So it's really important to know what our basket C items are, and especially when we're dysregulated, which I'm going to talk about later, because sometimes when we're upset, we forget our basket C items, and then we enter into something that we really don't need to enter into. So it can be helpful just to remind yourself of those things for yourself. So now I'm going to talk about adolescent development, which is 12 to 24. I don't know if it surprises you to know that this actually goes until they're 24. It doesn't stop when they're 18. In fact, they're just in the middle of it at that time. There are three things that change. There are actually many things that change in the adolescent brain, but I'm only going to talk about three things: the dopamine reward drive, pruning, and just thinking. And I'm going to describe to you what each of these are. And these are from Brainstorm. And did any of you see Dan Siegel when he was speaking here at Fairview? It's a few years ago. He is amazing. He's a rock star. But anyway, this book is really helpful because it goes through all of the difficult changes for teens in their brain. And there are actually little sections for the teen to read. So you can read it with your child, and you can help them know what's happening with their brain so that they can make better choices about their behavior, understand why they're doing what they're doing sometimes. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, in adolescence, it appears that dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that's central in creating our drive for reward, is lower. This means that teens have a lower base rate of dopamine than adults. So it takes more for teens to feel the same as what we feel with events and adventures. So if our dopamine is here, and let's say, I don't know how many of you ski, but I'll just use that since we're in Colorado. If we ski, we go here. Yay, this is thrilling, this is wonderful. Well, teens are down here. So it takes a lot more for them to get up here. And that's why they oftentimes don't enjoy, a day of skiing. That's really exciting and thrilling. And they talk to you about feeling bored a lot of the time because they really don't have as much dopamine on board as we do.
So does that explain their sullen attitude?
Yes, well that can be part of it, yes.
The grunting. The grunting, yeah.
Yes, the nonverbal, the caveman-like responses. There are probably a lot of different things, but that's one of them. They're just, so. So the heightened drive for reward-related dopamine can lead to several outcomes. So first, teens can be impulsive and act without thoughtful reflection. I'm sure you've seen this. So that looks like I'm skiing, and skiing is fine, or maybe it's not fine, but there's a jump, and I'm going to take that jump, and impulsively they take the jump. So these are times when they really don't think through it. The second is that teens are much more susceptible to addiction because all of the behaviors and substances that are addictive involve the release of dopamine. And we're not just talking about substances, we're talking about food, we're talking about media, we're talking about reckless driving, we're talking about a number of different things that heighten that sense of dopamine for them that can be dangerous. So a quick fix for their dopamine release can be part of an addictive cycle because it happens like that. That's what they're going to go to more likely. And due to the heightened and quick response, teens will still engage in these behaviors even knowing that they're dangerous for them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a different strategy. Just educating them isn't enough. I still think it's really good to talk with them and educate them, but it's not enough. So finally, teens tend to think in literal or concrete terms. So they just examine the facts, they don't see the big picture. And this is different from impulsivity. I think that this is a really important point. It was really helpful for me to understand this hyper-rationality. What they do is that they put a lot of weight on the positive outcome and not much weight on the negative consequences. So, yeah, maybe I'll get caught, but it's gonna be so much fun, I'm gonna do it anyway. And it's especially activated when teens are with their peers or believe their peers will observe their actions. And so with social media, peers don't need to be present. So if they know they can Snapchat it or they can Instagram and people are going to see what they did, that still gives that heightened peer experience. So these are some strategies for that increased drive for reward. So the regulatory fibers of the brain begin growing to counter that revved up go of the dopamine reward system. So we do have a little help on board. Teens have a little bit of help on board. This less impulsivity and the more cognitive control does lead to less risky behavior. So this does happen over time. It's not something that doesn't change. As the fibers begin to grow, we, as parents, can enhance their growth by helping to create a mental space between impulse and action. And this can be developed at any age. I don't know if you guys have heard of the cookie experiment. So they did this experiment with kids. If you Google it, it comes up on YouTube. It's actually kind of funny, where they gave a child a cookie and they said, okay, you can eat this cookie now, but if you don't eat the cookie now, we'll give you 2 cookies. Yeah, and so you see the kid, they leave them with the cookie in front of them, and you can see the kid kind of sitting there, like, should I eat the cookie? And some kids don't, some kids do. And this was related to that ability to delay gratification. And so some kids already have a little bit of that ability, and we can strengthen that. And some kids really struggle with that. And then I think we don't want to frustrate our children, but we can introduce little ways for them to get used to that feeling of delayed gratification. And then this can help us during the teen years. The other thing is taking part in positive activities that increase dopamine. So this is a list of things we've done as a family. Like Alan said, we're adventurous sort. I haven't actually played paintball with my sons, but I've taken them to play paintball. But as you can see, these all give that dopamine rise. And there's a program around here called the Natural Highs Program for kids who have gotten into addiction to teach them other ways to get that dopamine reward. I think if we provide those for our kids when they're young, before these things start to happen in their brains, they already have that to go to. So they know when I hike or when I ski or when I do watch scary movies or go to haunted houses or whatever, backpack, I get that little bit of a burst. And so then when they're introduced to drugs, they know that's not the only thing that's going to give them that good feeling. All right, so also it's really helpful just to try to bide your time. The longer teens go without getting into addictive behaviors, the more chance they have for their brain to develop and for their dopamine to be at a higher level. Some parents will say, hey, if you stay clean or don't engage in addiction until you're 21, I'll give you a car, or I'll give you a certain amount of money, or we'll go on a trip, or I'll let you have something that you really want. Telling kids not to use substances or trying to scare them with the health risks, as I mentioned, doesn't work according to research. But what does work is appealing to teen strength. So when, like with cigarettes, for example, when they said to teens, the cigarette companies are manipulating you to get your money. They want you to get addicted, and they're going to have your money, and you're going to be addicted for the rest of your life. That actually appealed to teens more. Well, I'm smarter than those cigarette companies. I'm not going to let them fool me into smoking their cigarettes. And so that actually was more effective in saying you're going to die, believe it or not. You can also use their strengths to help them decide not to do it. So when my son, all of his friends started smoking pot, and pot is a much bigger issue than alcohol right now, you guys may know. So he said to me, all my friends are smoking pot. I researched it, I looked it up, I saw what is the healthiest way or the cleanest way to do it, what's the safest way if I'm going to try it. And instead of getting upset with him and saying, oh my God, I can't believe you're going to smoke pot, don't smoke pot, I said, wow, that's really interesting. What did you learn? And he said, well, I learned this, this, and this, and we were able to talk about it. So then when he tried it, which he did, he came to me and he said, I tried it, and I said, what did you notice? What happened? And he told me. I said, well, what did you think about it? And he said, I didn't really like it. I don't really think that that's something that I want to do. And so it was a win-win for both of us. He got to experience it while he was talking to me about it, and then we got to discuss it. And then I also reminded him of our chiropractor who said that he made $20,000 as a senior, being the designated driver. I said, yeah, so if you don't like this, you can make a bunch of money driving your friends around. So I think appealing to that positive, you're going to get a lot more than trying to The other thing, because of hyper-rationality, as I mentioned to you, they think, oh my God, this is going to be so fun and so amazing. Natural consequences are great. So I always tell parents, let your kid get their license. There is nothing worse than having your license and making a poor decision and watching that car sit out in front of your house knowing that you have your license and you're not allowed to drive it. So natural consequences get in there a little bit more, ooh, that didn't feel good. I thought it was going to be really fun, but it didn't feel so good. So lose their phone if they're not using it appropriately, write a paper on the dangers of whatever they're doing, substance or otherwise. A car crash, I see, and I know it's challenging, it's so hard to be a parent, but oftentimes kids will get a crash that really was their fault and they weren't being safe, and then my son will say, oh yeah, they've got a new car within a week. But if you really help them understand the value and the consequence now, I think you need to earn money to get your car back or to get another car. Not only does it help reduce the reinforcement of doing these things, but it's going to lead to more productive behaviors. All right, so pruning is something that happens around 11 in girls and 12 and a half in boys. And I don't know if any of you have noticed, I noticed this. My kids, by 5th grade or 6th grade, I was like, oh my goodness, they're so rational and reasonable and they make so much sense. And then all of a sudden it seemed like they lost everything. I'm a part of this Broomfield Moms of Teens and Tweens. We're all talking about this right now in our little chat, and we're all reading books on the brain. But pruning can explain why this happens. During pruning, the brain leaves the neural connections that are being used and discards the ones that we don't need anymore. So this is really important. It's sloughing away neurons and connections, and it sloughs away anything that the brain thinks it doesn't need and keeps and rebuilds the things that it does need. So our experience and our team's experience shapes the connections that are kept, so the brain will respond to how attention is focused and what activities are occurring. It's basically a use it or lose it kind of a proposition. And so this is why it's so important for us as parents to promote pro-social behaviors for our children to engage in, to build those connections. A lot of my friends went back to work when their kids went to middle school, and I actually took a little bit more time. I was working, but I made sure to be home a little bit more in the afternoon, because this is when you really need to help their brain develop. They're exposed to so many different things, and you really have these teachable moments. You maybe aren't on call the same way you used to be, but when they come home and somebody has talked about something, you want to be the person to help develop the pro-social response to that as opposed to their peers. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the brain, but I will just tell you what the myelin sheath is. You may already know. It covers the membranes among interleaved neurons and helps with efficiency and effectiveness in the connections, development, and flow of information and function of the brain. If you just were like, what did she just say? Don't worry about it. But all you need to know is between the myelin and the pruning, it creates more coordination in the brain, which leads to just thinking, which I'm going to talk to you, and wiser judgment. So again, your teens are on that path. They're developing these things, and we can keep supporting them while this is happening. So the third change that happens with adolescence is this just thinking. It's big picture thinking. And decisions can be made based on positive values and focusing on what matters. As this starts to develop, it can help with that dopamine reward system that I talked to you about, and with the hyper-rationality. And so with this new skill, instead of shutting down an impulse, you can actually promote the positives. Kids start to see the bigger picture. So when my son was younger, my younger son, and he was on the phone doing homework, and I would go into his room, I would maybe take his phone away. Sorry, you lose your phone. With just thinking, I can say, oh, I see that you're on your phone. I know you really want to talk to your friends, and I know you said that you want to go to college out of state. It's really hard to get into college out of state, and it's really expensive. So if you can get a scholarship, that's going to make it more likely. And I'm wondering if you're spending a lot of time on your phone, you maybe aren't going to get to do these things. And whether at the time is like grunts, give the caveman response or not, I think it gets in there in a different way. Like, oh, what do I want for my life? What do I want to do? And then I think it changes behavior. I remember my older son, when he was a sophomore, he looked at me and he goes, I get it now. What I do affects me in my life. It doesn't really affect you and Dad. And I was like, oh. And one of those moments, right? So anyway. So this is my favorite thing about adolescence. Adolescence is not just a time to get through. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, just hunker down and get through adolescence. It actually can be a really exciting time for our kids, and there's a lot that needs to be accomplished for adolescent development. So yes, there's a lot of lability and emotion and high drama, but this is also where our kids get emotional spark and joy and joie de vivre. One of the things I love doing with my kids is watching funny things. You know, you can think, okay, if they're going to be emotional, can we support positive emotion? We love Impractical Jokers. We love comedies. We love sharing videos. I don't know if you guys have seen that video where there's a dog and an owner, and he's talking about what he wants from the refrigerator, and the dog's like, yeah. And then he says, I'm going to eat that, and the dog goes, oh. So it's really fun to just laugh and have lightness and joy. Certainly you're going to have plenty of the others, so to introduce that can be nice. And yes, it's about their peers, and they get in trouble with their peers, and they're obsessed with their peers, and their peers are so much more important than us. But this is where healthy social development occurs. This is how kids learn to get along with other kids and get along in the world. And yes, you know, your teen tells you they're bored, and this is a development, but this is the development of our ability to seek out and create new experiences that fully engage our senses, emotions, and thinking in new and challenging ways. I really believe that kids need to have novelty during this phase. They feel invulnerable and they're grandiose. If you try to drive a car as an adult, it is terrifying. I think it's really important for people to learn, or maybe not for all of you. My brother's girlfriend tried to drive a car in her 30s and she was scared to death. But I think there are big things that kids need to do, that they need to do them while they have this bravado on board, like driving and leaving home and doing things for themselves, getting their first job. So I think it's important to support that. And then creative exploration. Through development of this, you see conceptual thinking, abstract reasoning, expanded consciousness. Kids see the world through a new lens. They challenge the status quo. This can be seen as being disrespectful. Kids will go toe-to-toe with you, and they'll argue with you, but you can help them do this in a respectful way and help with healthy growth in this area. So my favorite story about this is my younger son. When he was learning about world religions this year in his class, he came home and he said, Mom, I'm going to be a pastafarian. I'm like, pastafarian? I've never even heard of this before. So apparently this is a religion, and there's like a pasta monster that's their god or something. But get this, the reason he wanted to be a pastafarian is because if you're a pastafarian, you can wear a colander on your head for your driver's license picture. And he thought, won't it be funny to wear a colander on my head for my driver's license picture? Well, this was totally a basket C item for me. I'm like, whatever, I don't care. We bought the colanders, they're in his room. I'm like, if you want to do this, that's fine. But I did say to him, you know, if you get there and they say no, you need to be respectful. You need to understand that there are rules, and you're not going to push the rules around this. Well, the day came, and he forgot his colanders, and he went and he got his picture taken. And that afternoon, he was driving his car. He drove to the Walmart, and a police officer saw him, and I think profiled him, maybe pulled him over, and he didn't have his registration and insurance in the car because they were still with all of our paperwork for his license. And the police officer said, oh, I see that you just got your license today, I'm going to let you go. And when he came home, I said, what do you think would have happened if you had a colander on your head in that picture? Maybe they wouldn't have been so agreeable. So anyway, you can use this in a really positive way, but you can also teach them to be respectful around this. So parenting is the hardest thing that we do. I loved what you said about come to the mom's meeting. Even if you feel like you're a horrible mom. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Bad Moms. It is, yes, a bunch of my girlfriends and I went to the theater and saw it. One of them was the PTA president of our school. It's hilarious. But you know, all of them talk about how hard it is and how challenging it is, and none of us are perfect. We all struggle. And these are some of the things that can lead to our own personal dysregulation that make it hard to be present and hard to parent. My kids didn't sleep through the night until they were 6 and 9, and we finally realized that we needed to put them in the same room. They would come in and wake us up and come into our room. I was not regulated during that time. I was having ocular migraines, just standing at Costco, couldn't see out of my eye. We are also live in reactive mode. On Oprah's Super Soul Sunday podcast, which is amazing, she was interviewing Pico Iyer, who wrote a book called The Art of Stillness. And he was talking about him, he was using our phones as an example, but every time we get interrupted by our phone, it takes us 25 minutes to get back on track, and we're interrupted every 10 to 11 minutes. So we're always trying to get back on track. I think in parenting, it's even maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I know you've probably all had that experience where you're like, oh my goodness, can I just get this one thing done or just complete this one thought? That leads to dysregulation. We're overwhelmed by the tasks of life. I remember looking at my kitchen, it looked like a bomb had gone off in it, and I was like, I can't even think about this. And I looked at the Ovaltine and I thought, I can put the Ovaltine away. And I got the Ovaltine and I put it away. So sometimes it's just overwhelming. Oftentimes we don't have a lot of support. We've moved around. We don't have family close by. There are such performance expectations on being a parent and for our kids. It's really, really overwhelming. And we have a lot of difficulty with self-care. I wanted to write one of those, I don't know if you ever saw You Know You're a Redneck When books. I'm from the South, so I wanted to write a You Know You're a New Parent book when you can't clip your toenails. So, with self-care, it's really challenging. I do want to put a plug in, though. There's a book called The Telomere Effect by Blackburn and Epple that highlights the effect that chronic stress has on our telomeres, which are the caps on the ends of our chromosome that affect aging, health, disease. And we can protect and mend these caps through healthy lifestyle. So focusing on sleep, an anti-inflammatory diet, exercise, social support, connection, and positive thinking. We can't do every one of these things every day, but really reminding yourself these are things I do need to take care of my own health. So what does dysregulation look like? These are some things that happen for me when I'm dysregulated, but maybe think about it if you feel comfortable sharing. I'm just curious what you notice when you're dysregulated.
Yeah.
You what? All right. Anything that isn't on my list? Yeah.
Along with the short fuse, I become very irrational.
Irrational, absolutely.
And so much more willing to engage in their irrationality. Even
Yes.
if they do stuff, I can go like, wow, I just became a 10-year-old. That was sad.
Yes. Well, 10 is good. Fighting with peanut butter, 3, right? And that's because, and I'm going to talk about why it is so challenging, but that's because that's limbic arousal. When we're in limbic arousal, we lose our prefrontal cortex, so we're not rational. Very good.
Well, it's great because I know that, but that doesn't help when this is happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to give you some strategies. Hopefully it'll help. Not always, though.
Sarcasm, that you go like, oh, well, that was a really good decision on your part.
Yes.
The kid doesn't know what you're saying. It's like, oh, that was a great decision on my part.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't get sarcasm. And so either they do that or it just makes them mad because they know you're kind of making fun of them, but they don't get the joke, So as you thought about your own symptoms of dysregulation, I'm sure all of you could relate. Yes, this happens to all of us. There isn't one of us that this doesn't happen to. So there are 2 physiological challenges to mindful parenting. So the first one is the negativity bias. Our ancestors were not the ones standing around the fire singing Kumbaya. They were the ones that saw a rock and said, lion, and fled, because they're the ones that survived. And so we are a product of their nervous system of, many, many, many years of that kind of danger threat response. And so the negativity bias, we scan for danger and threat. We're only looking for bad news. We over-focus on it. Oh, it's bad, it's horrible, it's awful, catastrophic thinking. We overreact to it. This is the worst thing in the world. Oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? And that installs it efficiently in our memory. It's why we're more likely to be able to think of negative things than positive things. In fact, in working with couples, they need 5 positives to make up for 1 negative. That's how much the negativity gets in our brain. The second thing that happens are shame triggers. Now shame, and this is a term that Brene Brown uses. I'm going to talk a little bit more about her, but it's any time you don't feel enough. I'm not a good enough parent, I'm not smart enough, I'm not cleanly enough, I'm not holy enough, I'm not nice enough, I'm not as connected to my partner as I could be, I don't have enough friends. Those are all shame triggers. And the way this plays out in parenting is, And if they're both together, I find parents to be the least effective. Oh no, negativity bias. My children are not going to succeed. There are all these horrible things about them. And shame trigger, and it's my fault. I didn't do a good enough job parenting. And when parents get in this place, it's really hard for them to know how to be a mindful parent and be an effective parent. So I'm going to talk about counters for these two things. So the first parent strategy I'm going to talk about is working with the negativity bias, and this comes from Rick Hansen. He wrote a book called Resilient, in addition to many books, and he has a website that's free. He has more resources on that website. If you were there every day for a year, you wouldn't get to all of them. So I recommend that you check him out. Plus his book Resilient is amazing. So I know you all have paper and pen, so I would like for you to pull that out. And I want you to think for a moment about the child you feel least connected to today. I'm gathering that changes depending on the day and your child and what's happening. But we're going to start with the one you feel least connected to. And I want you to write on your paper from 0 to 10, 0 not connected at all, 10 as connected as you could be to that child, what number you are, where you are with your connection to that child. So y'all get the number? All right, so you're going to just have that. I'm not going to have you do anything with it right now. So the parenting strategy we're going to talk about is to have a positive experience, enrich that experience, and then you're going to absorb it, and then you're going to link it. And I'm going to tell you how to do each of these. So to have a positive experience, we can get that two ways. One, we can notice when it happens. I was hiking yesterday, and I could hear a lot of people grumbling as they were going up the mountain, and I was just loving the blue sky and the fir trees and the fact that I was able to hike. I couldn't believe how beautiful the day was. So we can just notice when we're having it and have that. The other way is to create the positive experience. A lot of people do this with gratitude journals. My friend Amy, who's here today, and I do a yes list each week where we talk about what went well over the week and things that we're grateful for and things we want to do in the week to come. So there are all sorts of ways to create those positive experiences. So what I'm going to have you do right now, since your child is not here, is to create that positive experience. I am going to give you a minute to write down all of the times, and this again is that same child that you feel least connected to. Write down all the memories you have of times when you felt connected to that child. And you can start now. All right, you have about 10 seconds, so if you can think of any more, just one last juicy connection. All right, so I want you to take the connected experience that feels most salient. Either it just happened or it was particularly strong. It's something that you can really remember to be able to work with this exercise. I want you to enrich that with 5 steps. If you want to keep your eyes open, that's fine. You can close them as well. So I want you to feel that connection as an emotion in your body. See where you feel that sense of connection. And then when you can feel that, grow that feeling. Just set the intention for that feeling to grow within you. Some of the things that can help it grow are to think of novel aspects of it. Oh, yeah, now I realize why that happened. Oh, this happened and I didn't realize it. What are some things that maybe you didn't realize at the time? And then why did that matter to me? Why did I feel so connected with that experience? And then I'm going to have you just hold this for about 20 seconds. So just really let yourself feel that. All right, and so while you're still in this place of really feeling that feeling, you're going to absorb it by really letting it sink in. You can use imagery. Again, you can keep focusing on the sensation and really surrender to it. Really give over to it. Just let yourself soak it in like you're a sponge. It's really important for us to do this. This is called an installation. 95% of what we learn, even our aha moments, are gone. We don't remember them. But if we can really feel it in the body, it gets into our memory, and we have many different ways that we remember things in a much different way. Now, this is enough for you to have an installation, but if you want to, you can do this last step. So take that positive experience in the foreground, and then bring up a negative experience with this child. Nothing traumatic, please, just something annoying, a slight annoyance. You're learning a new skill, you don't want to stress the system. And then let that positive soothe or replace the negative. Just really bring yourself back to that, like maybe when you were a 10-year-old, as the example came up, and with your child, and then really feel that sense of connection in that situation. And so as you want, you can just come back, but I'd like for you now to think about on a scale of 0 to 10, how connected you feel to that child that I had you write the number down before. Write that number down. How many of you, the number increased? Yeah, absolutely. And we can do this all the time. It's just right there. It's right within us to be able to feel more connected to our children. The having it and enjoying it, which is what you did, and then as Rick Hansen says, mo better. The more you do it, the better it is. So now we're going to talk about shame resilience, and this is from Brene Brown. She has lots of literature on this, and I think she's just amazing. When we get triggered in shame, it's really important to know that we're in shame. That is number one, first and foremost, because what happens is our limbic system, our fight or flight, it kind of gets triggered. And shame is a trauma response, and our limbic system is the trauma zone, the fight or flight zone. And when we're in that place, fear or anger can drive us. The prefrontal cortex isn't online, so we're actually more likely to do and say things that make the situation worse, and sometimes then we can have more shame because of the way we handle the situation. So it's really important to figure out how you know that is in your body. So when my kids were little, my older son was 4, he looked at me one day and he said, "Mommy, why are you angry all the time?" And I realized, oh my goodness, he's right. I'm angry a lot and I'm yelling at them. They're like little kids, I've been yelling at them. And what I started to realize was I would feel discomfort here when I started to get annoyed. And if it went to here, I would yell. And so I started to be really good at finding, and when it started to get here, I would even say to the kids, okay, Mommy's starting to have that feeling she has right before she yells, and I don't want to yell, and you don't want me to yell, so what can we do in this moment to change it? And not only did it help, I quit yelling, but it helped them realize, oh, there are these different things that are happening in our bodies as far as how we feel, and maybe we can do something about it. We would do this, let's change a channel if we want to change our emotion. You know, there are just different ways that we can work with our own physiology. So what's really helpful is to be mindful when you start to feel pressured, uneasy, frustrated, stressed, and if you can label it tense, worried, annoyed, sad. And Brene Brown says just say pain, 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 because it's painful when we're in shame. It actually brings online our prefrontal cortex. So even just that saying a word can bring our prefrontal cortex online. If you can, in the moment, kind of take a break. You can take a breath. I don't know if you've seen the National Geographics with the animals and a predator comes. What do? They hold their breath, right? If you breathe, that's our system sign that we're safe, that we're okay, and it can just bring our prefrontal cortex back online. We can say a prayer, again, that's using prefrontal cortex. We can stop speaking, put hands behind the back so that you don't strike out. Sometimes we're inclined to, impulsively do something. If you give yourself some touch, this is a great posture to have. You can do both. You can kind of keep your hands to yourself and then also have some warmth or some touch around that, which can be really helpful. And if you're noticing that you can't pull back, you can leave. Brene Brown has a phrase that she uses, this isn't productive, I've got to leave now, and she does. And you know, you can even have this with your kids, like, you know, maybe it's bananas or something, you know, bananas, and then you know you got to go because you can't come back in the moment. And then getting back on your emotional feet. So the feeling the soles of the feet practice that we did at the very beginning. So research has shown that that practice can help regulate strong emotions such as anger. And I was actually doing that before you guys came here because, I mean, how many of us feel nervous speaking in public, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm grounded. So you can do that exercise to kind of get yourself back on your emotional feet, literally. You can, if you do take a break, you can talk to a friend or your partner. Shaking is actually really helpful. So again, those animals, they're like this. When the predator's gone, what do? They twitch and shake. So really getting that out. You can do yoga poses, anything that makes you feel strong or grounded can really be helpful. And then once you're a little bit more grounded, you can try to explore what might be underneath the triggering. So for me, 99 times out of 100 is fear. And then what does that triggered part need? And for me, it's typically reassurance, just to know that I'm okay, that it'll be okay. And when you're in that space, it's really hard to be angry or panicked with your parenting. You can be, as we've been talking about, a more mindful parenting, a more mindful parent. So just 3 more additional parenting strategies together here. So the family thermometer, I talked about my own internal stress thermometer. In the book Bipolar Teen that Alan mentioned, there is a section on strategies for parents who have kids with bipolar disorder, but I think that this is also really helpful for families in general. You create a stress thermometer from 0 to 100, and then as a family, you talk about where different stressors are on that thermometer for you. So I was working with a family where the kid said, if I get bullied at school, I'm 100, and then the dad said, if I have a hard day at work, I'm a 70. And they got in the habit when they came home of checking in with each other. Where are you on your stress thermometer? I'm 100. Oh, okay, then I know I'm not going to ask you to take the trash out because you're already at 100. Or Dad, I'm at a 70. And the kid said, oh, okay, I'm not going to do that annoying thing that I do all the time or ask you for something. And so you can use this as a family, which is really nice. Self-compassion is tremendous. That feet exercise I had to do came from the Mindfulness Self-Compassion Workbook by Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer. They're both researchers who research self-compassion. She's at the University of Austin at Texas, and he's affiliated with Harvard. And self-compassion is 3 things. Mindfulness. This is a moment of suffering. This is painful. This is challenging. 2, kindness. How can I be kind to myself in this moment? How might I talk to myself the way I would talk to a friend? And 3, common humanity. We all struggle. All parents go through this. I'm not alone. I'm not the only parent that's gone through this. And actually, all humans struggle. And oh, by the way, my child is probably struggling right now. And that can help us with compassion for our child in the moment. And then empathy, I want to give you the definition of empathy. We cannot put ourselves in another person's shoes. We just can't. We have our own lens. We can't remove our lens. We can't put somebody else's lens on. So seeing another person's perspective as being just as valid as yours, that is empathy. And we have a national crisis of empathy right now. And I really believe that if we can teach our children empathy through giving them empathy and teaching them about empathy, maybe this generation is going to do a little bit of a better job of working together. Sorry, that's my one.
Could you repeat that definition?
Yes. Seeing another person's perspective as being just as valid as yours.
And can you say the authors of the self-compassion?
Yes, Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, and Christopher Germer, G-E-R-M-E-R. And Kristen Neff has a website, selfcompassion.org, and there it's free. And there's, yes, selfcompassion.org. And there's a quiz you can take on there to see what your self-compassion is. In full disclosure, when I took that quiz, I had a very low score. And everybody I know who's taken that quiz had a very low score. So if you have a low score, don't let it be a shame trigger. You probably will. It just gives you something to work on. I took it recently again, and it was really high. But what I want to say about empathy is that it's really important to see things from your child's point of view. We were driving in the car, and my younger son said to me, I said something, I don't even know what I said. He said, don't be so negative. And in that moment, I was like, I wanted to say, I'm not being negative, and you're negative all the time. Why would you say I'm negative? But I thought, oh, wait a minute. Okay, let's practice empathy. And so I said to him, okay, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm not quite sure what I said. Would you tell me what was negative about that? And he told me, and I said, okay, well, would you mind letting me know in the future when I say something negative? I don't want to be negative, but I wasn't even aware that that's what that was. And then there were times down the road where I would say to him, hey, I want to check something out with you. And he says, you're wondering if you're going to be negative? And I'm like, yeah. So it became this thing where we were able to connect, which was really nice. And so this is from the prophet Khalil Gibran, and I think that this is empathy for our children. You've probably all read this before. But if we can really see that our children are their own people, we can appreciate them and not try to put our stuff on them. So final parenting strategy, repair, and I'm going to use an example from my own life this week. Had quite the week. But anyway, I'm not going to get all the details. So Saturday night into Sunday, my younger son did something really, really, really naughty. And I handled it really well. I was really proud of myself. I knew, adolescent brain, this is why he's doing this. I went through the whole thing. I was, there were consequences, but I didn't get angry. But then on Monday, he did something else. It wasn't nearly as naughty, but I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I exploded on him. Like I haven't in years. I lost it. I truly lost it. So we had to do some things together that day, and we kind of weren't really talking to each other. We certainly were just doing what we had to do. But the next day, I came to him, and my attempt was to reconnect. Because I think it's really important we have those moments that we reconnect, or even if our child has a difficult moment with us, to reconnect with them. And I apologized. I said, I'm really sorry for the way I handled that. We talked about the situation. I said, I responded that way because of what had happened, but it wasn't okay for me to treat you that way. And then I had to realize that he was upset. He said, that doesn't help. You hurt my feelings, and I'm sorry it doesn't work, which we've said to him a million times. I'm like, oh, okay, those are our words. But I had to let him be upset. And so all of that week, from Tuesday through Friday, we had a bunch to do. He was applying for a job. It was really involved. We had to get all this paperwork together. We literally had to spend hours together. But we just were polite and did what we needed to do, and we didn't really talk about it again. And then Friday morning, I went down to get my coffee, and I would love to have shared the note with you. I asked him, and he wouldn't let me share what it actually looked like and said. But basically it said, Mom, I love you, and I appreciate you, and please give me a huge hug before I go to school this morning. So being able to let him be upset and give it space and time, I got the reward that morning. So I'm going to leave you with a quote by Rainer Maria Rilke. Once the realization is accepted that even between the closest human beings, infinite distances continue to exist, a wonderful living side by side can grow up. If they succeed in loving the distance between them, which makes it possible for each to see the other whole against the sky. Isn't this what we want for our children, to become whole? And for us to have those whole connected relationships with them as separate people. All right, well, thank you so much for your time and attention.
That's humanity. That's good. Any I don't know, quick question or response? I don't know. It's just like, we probably got no time, but I think the way that you kind of wove practical and theoretical considerations, as well as the humanity of being the human being you are. Great. I don't know. We have one question here. We can do that.
So, if your grown-up child has mental illness like bipolar, this learning process or brain development is postponed. Is that correct? Or
it can be. Yeah, and with bipolar disorder in particular, because it's kind of my area of expertise, even when people are stable, they do still have cognitive difficulties and executive function challenges. I actually think a lot of the left-right brain integration types of things can be really helpful, accentuating the positive, really asking the adult child about their experience, that empathy piece, seeing their perspective as being as valid as ours. Because not only even in stability are there executive function difficulties, but then when they have an episode, it really compromises their ability. Because where bipolar affects is the limbic system, so sort of that fight or flight that I was talking about. So it's really hard for them to access that prefrontal cortex in the same way. So yeah, sometimes development, especially with ADHD, you see that where development's forestalled. Like if a non-ADHD kid is like this, they're like this, and they meet up. Bipolar's a little different. I mean, it takes a little bit longer for them to get there, but then they also are going to have cognitive compromises. I oftentimes tell people bipolar disorder, they call it a mood disorder, but it's as much a thinking difficulty as it is with mood. And so it's really helpful for is it a he or she? To really learn some strategies around the executive function piece, and also some of these strategies around shame triggering, staying regulated. I also do somatic therapy, and so, which is, if you've heard of EMDR, brain spotting, or somatic experiencing, really helping people get grounded in their body and out of their heads. With bipolar disorder, their head's going so fast, so any meditation can be hard, but just walking and feeling the feet, different ways to get grounded and regulated can be helpful to get out of that kind of frenetic thinking piece. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Let's just thank her one more time. Blessings.